Welcome back into the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I am your host, Garret Price, and today I've brought my good friend Peter Bartausky with me. Peter, how's it going, buddy?
It's going great. I'm so excited to talk about this negative issue that affects us all in fantasy football.
I greatly prefer the positive, like this guy's gonna break out, this guy's a sleeper, this guy's top 12, book it. Like, and then you got to be like, actually, I don't like this guy, and then you just feel so mean. Because it's nothing against them. Like I'm not trying to take their livelihood. I'm just saying, like, if it were up to me, I would worry about drafting them.
Yep. And I always try to say this before, like in intros to episodes like this. I hope I'm wrong.
Sure.
Like
we're
there's
not
an
rooting
element
against
to,
these players.
We're not rooting against them if they have great seasons. But these are players that we have concerns about this year, right now.
Yeah. When you look at their profiles, when you have certain things that you're checking out and you're looking at, you're like, that doesn't seem to equate to fantasy success. Yeah. And every player has, like, even the best players, you could probably find a random metric on them that would be like, oh, that doesn't look good this year. Like, stats can be very misleading, very deceiving, but there are some that are a little more telling than others, some that are a little more reliable than others, some that are, better predictive. So that's our goal today, is we each have 3 players that we've come in prepared to discuss a little bit. And look, we might agree on all 6. We might agree or disagree completely with each one of our takes from the opposite person, but that's what we're here to do. We're here to talk it out.
I might agree.
Discuss.
I might disagree with my own takes.
I actually don't agree with any of these. Any of his 3, any of my 3, they're all awful.
I actually
what a selling point for this video. Hey, they might all suck.
With two players for this video, I was researching it. I was like, I hate this. This doesn't make sense. This guy's not going to bust.
Well, I know I have one from the ones that you told me that I could see a route for them busting, but I don't think they will. And we'll get into that a little bit, and we'll discuss it. But Pete,
Rachaad Bateman,
why don't you give me your first bust candidate of 2024?
Okay, we're gonna start this off a little. Just this guy is the dynasty darling of all tight ends, and his name's Brock Bowers. Okay.
Ooh.
And this is where we're talking about this season, right, Garret?
We're talking about this year, 2024, baby.
This year. I love him in Dynasty, guys. Okay.
For sure.
But he is currently going as tight end 9 in redraft and sleeper ADP. For reference, Sam Laporta last year, this is fantasy data ADP now. So I switched. I couldn't find the sleeper ADP on this.
Switchy.
But he was going as tight end 20. Okay. So I feel like the issue, though, is reviewing Sam Laporta and
Brock Bowers.
Sorry. A message just popped up on my phone and totally just...
That happens to me more often than I would like to admit.
All the time. But so that's kind of the comparison, right? Is if Sam Laporta can do it, Brock Bowers can do it. Mm-hmm. And I am here to tell you probably not. Because you look at the situation that Sam Laporta went in last year versus Brock Bowers this year. You got Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator for the Raiders, known previously as the Bears offensive coordinator. True. And he got fired. He ran the ball a lot. They were actually second in rushing yards last year. Justin Fields did have 657 of those rushing yards, but they ran the ball a lot. Bears offense had less passing yards last year than both the Raiders and the Colts. So I know you can't compare, but you can kind of look at offensive systems and what people were brought there to do.
Right. And if you haven't realized, Gardner Minshew, the former quarterback of the Colts, and then now the Raiders is what
that's why
Bowers and
that is why I'm comparing. That's why I brought up the Colts. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so good thing you brought up Gardner Minshew, Garret.
I'm glad I did.
So he stepped in admirably for the Colts last year. If you extrapolate his season, he passed for 4,322 yards.
Pretty good number.
That's pretty good. That's pretty great, right? 20 touchdowns, 12 interceptions.
Okay.
That's not as good. Touchdowns per game. If you look at that, touchdowns per game was 1.18, which is on par with Aiden O'Connell.
So either way, no good.
No good. So I'm worried that there are too many mouths to feed with Devontae Adams, and you got Jacoby Myers, and then you got Brock Bowers, and then you got Michael Mayer still, which is a serviceable tight end. Mm-hmm. That's why I think at tight end 9, he is kind of drafted around his ceiling. And that's why I think he won't return on your investment.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. Betting on rookie tight ends in general is a little bit of a risky business. We see year after year, rookie tight ends tend to not perform up to expectations in year one. Now, it's tough coming off a year when Sam Laporta did it so incredibly. Mm-hmm. But before that, very rarely do we have guys get in tight end 1 range. And if they do, it's tight end 8, tight end 11, tight end, guys like that. So I'm with you. I don't have a strong opinion either way on Brock Bowers. Like, is there a path where I could see him becoming the number 2 target right away and getting enough passing yards and all that? Like, I definitely think it's in the realm of possibility. But touchdowns are probably going to be a little harder to come by for this offense. So he would have to do it mostly on receptions. And he could do it, but that's a lot to ask of a young rookie right off the rip. So I don't feel strongly either way about this one. It would not shock me in the least if he busted. I could see him having a good season. So I think it's a good call. I definitely think it's somebody where if you're looking at other players drafted in a similar range, like I would rather have some other tight ends around his spot that I think are going to do pretty well. So I totally get that one. Have no issue with it at all. All right, let's get to my first guy. And we're actually going to stay at the tight end position. So I am a Cleveland Football Browns fan. And for years, we have been hearing about just wait till David Njoku breaks out. And every year, he kind of disappoints for fantasy purposes, always in that 500 or lower yard range. Sometimes he'll have a few more touchdown catches than others, but it just never really happens. And then finally last year, I believe it was 7 for David Njoku, finally we saw a little bit of the breakout. That second half of the season, specifically those last 5 games, he looked awesome. So you say, man, the tide has finally turned. David Njoku is going to be the guy this season. Well, let's not forget that there were several different quarterbacks the Browns played with last year. In particular, we had Deshaun Watson, we had Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and we had Joe Flacco. Now, I'm not worried about DTR. That's not going to affect anything for this year. But in David Njoku's games last year with Joe Flacco, he averaged 18.2 points. That was basically those last 5 games of the year. In his games with Deshaun Watson, 7.4. We're talking about an 11-point difference in points per game from one quarterback to another. Now, you could say, yes, but Deshaun Watson's going to be healthier and improved. Okay, let's even say he improves that. He improves it by 50%. Okay, well, that's still only putting him around 10, 11 points per game. Still nothing to get overly excited about. So I think for this year, I think there will be games because he's such a good athlete. And there will be times that David Njoku balls out. But when you factor in that we still have Amari Cooper, you added into the fold a Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore's still there. Tillman's there who they want to get more involved. Like, there's just a lot of players that could make things annoying for a David Njoku. And so I think on a week-to-week basis and even end of season, like, I don't know that we're going to get the monster year that we got last year at the end of the year from David Njoku. Just seems highly unlikely to me.
Yeah. No, I like it. Who would you prefer for this season only, Njoku or Bowers?
I actually have we did our tight end episode. I have Bowers one spot ahead of Njoku, but I was trying to figure out how to get Njoku even lower, but I just couldn't figure out a good way to do it. But I'm not in on Njoku at all. So I would rather take Bowers personally, but I don't have either one particular high. I think they were 11 and 12 for me in my rankings. So I didn't have them very high.
Yeah. For me, that range of tight ends is like, I'm not going to reach for either of them if I'm doing redraft, and I'll just grab a sleeper at the end. But anyway, okay. My next pick, I'm assuming this is the one that you're going to disagree with.
We'll see.
Zay Flowers.
Yep, this is the one.
Okay, here we go. I got so much notes right now. My screen is so chaotic. Okay, so he is currently going in front of. I miswrote that. He's going in front of George Pickens.
Okay.
Amari Cooper, Rashee Rice, and Tank Dell.
Is this Dynasty or redraft?
In redraft.
Okay.
So you look at where the expectation is he's going to be pretty good. He's going to be the wide receiver one on a hopefully ascending. Oh, you kind of paused there for a second. Whoops.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Glitch in the Matrix.
Oh. So he's expected to score more than those guys. Okay. Let's hop into this last year. So first 10 games of the season, he was a disappointment. Would you agree with that?
I would say so, yeah, or at least underwhelming.
Yeah, he had that great first game where I thought I was wrong about him because I've never been a huge fan of him. I remember talking to you about him on Better Sports last year.
That's right.
But so then Mark Andrews goes down, and then he starts having these really good, really kind of boom games. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to project what his season would look like if you just included the first 10 games that had Mark Andrews a part of the team. I do acknowledge the fact that rookies do grow in the offense and all that stuff. You know, it was a new offensive system last year, so it does make sense as the season progressed, he would have gotten better. But anyway, so the first 10 games, he would have averaged the whole season. If you extrapolate that out to a whole season, he would average 10.62 points per game.
Okay.
Which would have put him behind Terry McLaurin, Tyler Lockett, Cortland Sutton, Deontay Johnson, and Brandon Cooks. So I look at that potential, and then I look at what he did even with Mark Andrews being gone. The big thing that propped him up is he went from 1 touchdown to 4 touchdowns in that second half of the season. I am just worried about what's the production is going to come from, because I don't think he's going to have the volume that is needed to take the next step to being a valuable wide receiver 2 or back end, potentially wide receiver 1 for your fantasy football team.
So here's the thing about Zay Flowers. One, I get it, but typically when we look at rookies, we look at their second half of the season, not necessarily their first half of the season. So it takes some time usually for them to get going. And still, even in that first half where he averaged 10 points per game, a little over that, you still had some nice boom weeks in there, 17.7, 17.1. So like you had some good games in there as well, 12.3. So you had some good games in there, but he really only in those first 10 weeks only had one real dud. He had a 2.1 point per game or point game in week 9. Other than that, all of them were at least serviceable for a rookie. 13-point game, like a lot of very serviceable games. Really only that one like real big dud for him. But when you look at players, specifically rookie wide receivers, when you look at rookie wide receivers and you factor in what they do in their rookie year, I did a study over the past, I think it was 5 or 6 seasons. Wide receiver rookies that average 10 or more points per game in their first year. On average, those guys in year 2 had a roughly 2 points per game increase. So he had a good first season, and we only had a couple guys that went down. Garrett Wilson went down like 0.2 points. Jalen Waddle just had a bonkers rookie year, so he went down like a point. But like 15 of those 18 guys or something like that, I don't remember the exact number, but it was like a high percentage, like over 70% of those guys then ended up having a better season than they had the year before. So if you're going to add about 2 points per game onto Zay Flowers total, puts him at about 14.9 points per game. On a points per game basis, that would put him as a mid-range wide receiver 2 to even pushing a high-end wide receiver 2, depending on the total games played. But the other thing is on a separation. So separation's a big thing that I like to look at. How are guys getting open and how open are they? A lot of the guys towards the top, Rachaad Rice, Tyreek Hill, those are, some guys that had big years last year. Number 1 on that list was actually Zay Flowers. So he was getting open at a really, really high rate. So I am not overly worried. And we also saw Lamar Jackson with his highest yards total and completion percentage last year compared to what he's done the rest of his career. So I think things are trending in the right direction. So I am not with you on Zay Flowers busting this year. I think he's going to have a pretty good year.
Well, I mostly agree with you now. But I don't know. Like for me, what you said, this last year with Lamar was one of the best year passing wise for him, right?
Mm-hmm. So
how that offense looks like and the increase that will still be needed to have those 2 points, I don't know. I'm not saying he's going to like full on bust, but I am worried, and I would much rather take like a George Pickens or a Rachaad Rice or a Tank Dell who were able to have those more explosive weeks, but also just more consistent in their explosive weeks. Like Tank Dell was 19th in fantasy points per game. A smaller sample size for sure, but and just George Pickens with the potential of becoming the number 1 target in that offense. Do you think that Zay Flowers has a chance to become the number 1 target in that Ravens offense?
No, I think it's always going to be Mark Andrews, at least for the foreseeable future, maybe in 2 or 3 years. But for now, I think it's definitely Mark Andrews. And I don't necessarily disagree that those guys could, I think Tank Dell does have a good year. I think targets are going to be a little bit more of a struggle this year. But, I don't hate it. I think he's in the right range. Rachaad Rice, a lot of risk, but a ton of reward there possibly for him. So for me, it's the right range. All of these guys have a little bit of risk. Zay Flowers' biggest risk is they just don't pass the ball as much as other teams pass the ball. So there's risk with all of those guys. So for me, it's the right range. I'm not saying go out and buy, he's going to have a monster season. But I think that 13.5 to 14 points seems about right for me. I don't know that he gets up to 14.9, but I do think he improves on what he did last year. And I think he's a solid low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3.
Okay. Really quick, would you prefer having him or Amari Cooper on just redraft?
Ooh, I'm not in as much as other people are on Cooper, so I'll take Flowers.
Okay.
I think I would take Dell and McLaurin over him, but I think I would take him over Rice and Cooper.
Speaking of McLaurin,
I'm all in on McLaurin this year. I'm all in.
This is the jersey that I chose to show for the bust episode, though, because it's actually a Dotson jersey. It's my only jersey that I ever bought.
What a bummer. That's all right. Everyone I've ever bought is a Browns one, and that hasn't worked out great. So, I haven't had many, but as a kid, I had a Tim Couch one. I had a Courtney Brown one. Then I went on a strike. Didn't get any for a long time. Then I finally got a Peyton Hillis one.
Ooh.
And then I was like, finally, we have our savior, Baker Mayfield. and I bought a Baker Mayfield jersey. So, although not that he's a bust necessarily, just didn't work out for Cleveland. But
yeah. Yikes.
Yeah, so I'm 0 on the jerseys, if that makes you feel any better.
It doesn't. It actually makes me feel more depressed.
Well, it's a perfect time for a bust episode. All right.
Yeah.
Speaking of a bust, I cannot think of one guy that I am more confident in that he is going to bust in 2024 than Rachaad White. I am so tired.
First time you've ever said this.
I've never mentioned this before on the show. Premier time that this has happened. Look, if you've listened to the Dynasty Nerds podcast, if you've heard anything, you know that Rachaad White is a guy that I do not buy into. He's probably a fantastic human being, and I bet he makes a great chocolate chip cookie. But I don't want him. I don't want him on my fantasy team. Like, I don't. I think when you look at his numbers, dude had the third. He was actually tied for second in attempts last season. Tied for second, only behind Christian McCaffrey. What did he do with it? 3.6 yards per carry. Totally in the gutter. Now, you can blame him. You can blame the line, whatever you want to do. But it's the same situation. So it's not changing this year. It's the same situation. He's not going to be efficient on the ground. But you say, Garrett, we don't care about that. Stop bringing up the rushing yards. We care about the receiving. Okay, well, guess what they did in the draft? They went out and took one of only 2 players that had over 50 receptions at the running back position. One of them, Blake Watson for the Denver Broncos. And number 2, you had Bucky Irving for the Oregon Ducks. I think that there is a very real chance that Bucky cuts into his workload to a point where he does not become, not only is he not a low-end running back 1, actually it was a high-end running back 1 last year, but not only not a low-end running back 1, he's not even a running back 2. I think you're going to be looking at running back 3/flex play type of production this year for Rachaad White. Look, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'll have a bunch of egg on my face at the end of the season, but I could not be more confident in a guy that will not produce at the level he's going. His ADP, it's fluctuated throughout the offseason, but anywhere from running back 11 to running back 15, he's kind of always staying in that range, and there's just no way that I'm touching him at that value.
Man, so let's say if you accidentally drafted him on a dynasty team, okay? What are you willing to trade him away for?
I would trade him away for a high second. I would have no problem trading him away for a second. It would not take a first for me. Maybe even a mid-second. Like, I do not believe in him at all.
Well, and the other thing that we haven't really talked about that much is the Bucs lost their offensive coordinator.
Yeah,
so we don't know what this offense is going to look like. And that offense was kind of just built around him and Mike Evans. So
Yep. I'm
love it.
I'm out, Bob. All right, Pete, give us your last one.
Travis Etienne. It took me so long to figure out how to say his name correctly.
I remember you used to always say Etienne or whatever.
Etienne, whatever. So he is currently going at 18th overall on Sleeper ADP. He's seen in this tier of running backs where I wouldn't say they're the cornerstone running backs of like CMC, Robinson, and Hall, but he's in that next tier that is seen as a huge difference maker for your team. And I am really worried about just how he projects to this year. You look at the Jaguars offense second half of the season, it was not good, man.
It wasn't.
Evan Ingram had so much fun that second half of the year, but no one else was having fun.
No one else had a good time.
No one was having fun. So if you look at just his weeks 10 to 16 of the NFL season, I am excluding, I'm saying this on air, I'm excluding week 17 because that was a big week against the Panthers. Just so you know that there is a game excluded there. So if you extrapolate weeks 10 through 16 to a full 17 game season. As you can tell, I love to extrapolate.
Okay.
You get 1,147 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 44 receptions for 321 receiving yards, which is a average points per game of 14.36, which would have been RB 18 in points per game.
Okay.
Not great, but that is a segment of the season, right? So
sure.
You can't just ignore that. You can't ignore what he did in the first half. It was awesome. But I think what Etienne showed us is that he cannot hold up very well in a full season, because what have we been hearing this whole offseason about Tank Bigsby is we need this guy to spell Etienne so he doesn't get worn down.
Yeah.
And Tank Bigsby actually had a pretty good preseason. I try to not pay attention that much to preseason because
It's tough.
A lot of times it shows you what's not true. But with Bigsby, there's a reason why they didn't go out and really invest that much into the running back room. However confusing it is, they really do believe in Bigsby, which I loved him coming out of college, but just a bad start to year. And for rookies, that can just pile on and just make a really bad year. But if you look at Doug Peterson, he loves his committee backfield with his time in the Eagles. So I'm just worried about him really just giving you what you need when you're drafting him at that part of the draft.
This is another one where I don't have any issue with this. Like, I have some Etienne. I don't have a lot of Etienne. Partly the reason I have him is because there's just so many few running backs that get the type of workload that he gets, and at least have some talent. So I'm not against it, but he is really frustrating. Like, he can be a very inconsistent back at times. You know, when you have a stretch where you go from 36 points and 23.3, 22.7, 25.9, you're like, oh my gosh, this dude's amazing. And then you get 6.4, 8.9, 12.6. Like, you're like, oh, that stinks. You know, like, it's just, it's very up and down. Then you get some 17-point games, then back to 6. And he can just be a very frustrating back at times. And if you get him on a boom week, awesome. But he's another one with a lot of potential touchdown regression. We know that's not the most sticky stat. And so there is some touchdown regression possible there for a Travis Etienne. So let me get to my last one here. And apparently we are picking on the Jacksonville Jaguars because I'm going with Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, the biggest thing I heard, because look, overall, he's been kind of a disappointment. Obviously, that first year was terrible, but he kind of gets a pass because of the Urban Meyer stuff. Year 2 was okay, but the problem was he actually regressed in year 3, which I was a little bit worried about. But the big thing that I kept hearing was, don't worry, it was because of all the drop passes. And granted, he did have a decent amount of drop passes, but it wasn't like he was towards the top. Matthew Stafford had more, Jordan Love had more, Jared Goff had more, Josh Allen had more, Patrick Mahomes had the most in the league. So it's not like there were other quarterbacks that didn't suffer from that too and still have fantastic fantasy football finishes. But the thing that really worries me is his poor pass attempts. There was no player in the league that had more pass attempts considered poor or off target, according to Fantasy Pros, than Trevor Lawrence. Even ahead of Bryce Young, even ahead of Sam Howell. Like, he was the number 1 guy in poor pass attempts with 104. A lot of other guys are averaging in that kind of like 70 range, and he was just at the very tippy top. So that really worries me. And granted, you added some weapons. You added a Gabe Davis. You added a Brian Thomas. But is it going to be better with deep pass guys that you're going to have to chuck the ball deep to? Like, no, that would probably improve with short A-dot, close to the line of scrimmage type stuff. So I don't like these underlying numbers for Trevor Lawrence. I think he's a guy that has a bigger name than he does performance. So for me on Trevor Lawrence, despite adding weapons, I think he's going to be a little bit of a disappointment.
Oh man, I agree. Like he just really is still kind of living off of that, 101 Clemson hype. That like he's a good quarterback. I think we can all agree that he's a good quarterback, right?
Yeah, I think he's a solid NFL player, but I don't know that he's a guy that elevates your team.
No. Yeah, I agree with that.
And that's where it gets a little tricky. So with that is our bust episode. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. Peter, real quick, Super Bowl prediction. Who wins it this year?
Chiefs.
Yeah, can't blame me there. All right, thanks for tuning in to Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. Please put in the chat below who you think's gonna bust. Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
Wait, who do you predict?
I picked the Chiefs too.
Oh, okay.
3P, baby. They're not even my team. I don't know why I said baby, but 3P Dynasty.
They're not your baby.
They're not. The Browns are my baby, but my baby always disappoints me. So I have to live vicariously through other people's babies.
Yep.
All right.
Yikes.
See you guys.